everyone, welcome back to Alice and the Giant Bookshelf. Today's video is a book versus TV, and it's going to be about The Midnight Club by Christopher Pike. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you are new. My name's Alice and I have way too many books. And today, a book that I reread recently and how it compares to its brand new Netflix adaptation. We're going to be talking about The Midnight Club by Christopher Pike. If you haven't seen one of my book versus TV videos before, there is a playlist that you can check out. I like to talk in this series about how source material and films or TV compare to each other. In the course of this video, I will talk about the book, I'm going to talk about the TV show and break that down into the following sections: characters and cast, the setting and the plot. So let's get started. Let's pop The Midnight Club there and let's talk about it. So the book, first of all. The Midnight Club is a YA horror novel by Christopher Pike, published in 1994. And Christopher Pike was a very prolific YA horror author in the late 80s and early 90s. This particular book follows Alonka, a teen who is terminally ill with cancer. She lives in a hospice for dying teens, and she meets nightly at midnight with her fellow residents Kevin, Spence, Anya and Sandra to tell stories. They make a pact that whoever dies first will send a sign for the rest of them. So I've mentioned this book on my channel before. I first read this at 13, 14 and it made me unable to sleep. It really upset and scared me. And rereading it over 20 years later, I wasn't scared, but it is a very sad book, and I can see why I was upset by the content at that age. It's very different to other Christopher Pike books in the issues it deals with of young people coming to terms with mortality, and I personally don't believe that this is one of Christopher Pike's best books, and I actually preferred his books that involve revenge, raising the dead and serial killers. There is one theme that Pike keeps bringing up in some of the stories in the book. It's the theme of past lives, and this comes up in other Pike books. He definitely used it elsewhere, and he often draws on supernatural or sci-fi elements in his horror. So a very dark source material to adapt, and I was quite surprised to hear that out of all the Christopher Pike books that I have read in the past, that this was the one being adapted. The super sad story behind The Midnight Club I only actually learned after rereading it and researching the series, and this was that a terminally ill girl's parents contacted Pike back in the 90s to say she was a big fan. And he spoke to the girl on the phone because they lived at opposite sides of the country, I believe. She mentioned that the teens at her hospital would get together at midnight to discuss Christopher Pike's books, and he was inspired to write The Midnight Club for her, changing her story so that the characters would tell made-up stories instead of his stories. He asked her while he was writing it if she wanted to read it, but she wanted to wait until he had finished the book, and tragically she actually passed away before he could finish. So an extremely sad story behind the book, which actually made me almost see the book in a bit more of a new light. It obviously is very dark and serious content, especially for a book aimed at teenagers. That is the book in brief with no spoilers. Let's move on to the TV series. The Netflix adaptation of The Midnight Club is created by Mike Flanagan, who is famous for The Haunting of Hill House and The Haunting of Bly Manor, both of which have had sort of Halloween time release dates, just like this series. Mike Flanagan is apparently a long-time fan of Christopher Pike and made contact with Pike to be given the go-ahead. So interestingly, this adaptation comes full circle by making most of the stories the teen characters tell based on other Christopher Pike stories. So this actually adapts several other books: The Wicked Heart, Gimme a Kiss, See You Later, Witch, Road to Nowhere and The Eternal Enemy are all of the other books that feature in a big way. Just as a quick disclaimer, I don't believe I've actually ever read Gimme a Kiss or Road to Nowhere, and it's been a good 20 years at least since I read the other four. So I'll mainly stick to discussing The Midnight Club because I've read it really recently. So let's start with characters and casting. Compared to the book, we get a larger cast of characters and some changes to their stories. So Ilonka, the main character, in the book, Ilonka was Polish and English was her second language. She wears a wig, which she hopes that none of the other patients, except for her roommate Anya, know about. And she got diagnosed at 15 after her mother's death, and she's the youngest in the group at just under 18. The TV series keeps Ilonka as the main character, but changes her character somewhat. She's no longer Polish, but we do get a bit more backstory for her, which I really liked, with the series starting just before her diagnosis. Ilonka is portrayed as really clever, and she finds the hospice herself rather than being found by the doctor in charge as she is in the book. As with the book, Ilonka hopes she can change her prognosis, although TV series Ilonka goes about this in a different way to book Ilonka, and they both also have different types of cancer. The cast of characters is expanded, as I said, but it retains the other four main characters from the book. As well as those four main characters, Spence, Kevin, Anya and Sandra, we're also introduced to Amesh, who has brain cancer, and Natsuki, who has ovarian cancer, and Cherie, whose diagnosis isn't actually revealed in the series. In my opinion, the best adaptation in this series is of Ilonka's roommate, Anya. She is different to in the book, but retains some of the key character points. And she was played so well by Ruth Codd. Ruth Codd really brought this character to life as a real person who I fully believed was dying painfully. To be perfectly honest, to believe that the others were terminally ill did require quite a lot of suspension of disbelief at times, maybe apart from Amesh, who I did find believable as suffering from brain cancer. But a lot of the characters in this spend a lot of time looking really healthy for young adults with terminal illnesses. For me, Anya was the absolute highlight of this series. Her plot retained most of its key elements, with the possible exception of her ending, and there were slight changes to her backstory, but that didn't matter. It was a really good adaptation of her. And this series made me actually appreciate more what a key character she is in the book. Absolutely excellent. That character was spot on. Kevin, the love interest of the book, was much as I imagined, although if anything I felt he was given a little bit less personality here in the series. The series never really gave me much evidence that he was dying, other than him putting on a brave face and some makeup to go to his high school prom. His adaptation was fine. I liked the way they kept his way of continuing his story over multiple nights. Spence is a character in the book who only reveals his true diagnosis to Ilonka very late on. This revelation in the series comes much earlier, and I won't tell you what it is because that might spoil it. I felt this was a really good move, and it allowed the series to do a lot more with his character, so I felt that he was adapted well. Sandra is a quiet character in the book, and I thought that maybe the series would keep the detail of her never choosing to tell a story to the Midnight Club, but instead this character trait is kind of given to Cherie, and Sandra, I believe, does tell the story Gimme a Kiss, if I'm remembering correctly. Amesh, I thought, was a great addition to the cast of characters. He brought a lot for me to the overall feel of the series, and was a character who was really showing how he was coping with his mortality, and I did like the way his character was written. Natsuki for me was an okay addition. I liked the portrayal of depression, which is really only touched on in the book, maybe through the character of Anya. I liked the fact she was a bit of a writer. She was interesting, but I don't feel we got to dig into her character very much until late on in the series. Cherie was a much less interesting addition for me. We didn't find out much about her. The other characters didn't seem to believe a word she said, although I think by the end they realised that a lot of what she's saying is actually true. And it was nice that she helped Ilonka with her wig, and it was nice that she helped her at the end with the story that was going on. So those are the characters and how they compared. Setting. The name of the hospice has been changed. I don't think that mattered. The history was changed and expanded for the series. I loved the way they had set this series in the 90s. That was perfect for me. And some of the stories told seemed a little bit 80s too at times. And I thought this was perfect and very reminiscent of Pike's books, which very much still read as though they are set in the 80s or 90s. So let's talk about the plot and the adaptation in general. The book is in third person, so this adaptation doesn't suffer from the problem of adapting a first person book. I also feel that the book was small enough, at only around 200 pages, that the main details could be both easily adapted and built upon to make a 10-episode series. I love the inclusion of other Pike books as the stories the teens told. These were well done and they were often scarier than the main plot, and it allowed the series to really spread out and deal with serial killers, witches, VCRs that can tell the future, and so on. All wonderful things from Christopher Pike's past books. The main aspect of the book that I suspected would be axed, and it was the past life theme that runs through Ilonka's story in the book and links her to one of her fellow patients. I did expect this to go, I didn't miss it. It was an element in the book that I had kind of forgotten about, and it was pretty forgettable and added to the feeling for me that it wasn't one of my favourites of Pike's. For several of the 10 episodes, I felt like this was an adaptation that had really managed to keep the essence of the book and improve on it, which is so rare for me to think that. However, and this part may have mild spoilers for the Netflix series, so if you don't want to get any spoilers whatsoever, skip to the timestamp that I'm going to put in the description down below. Spoilers incoming. I did not enjoy the character Julia Jane and what turns out to be a sort of cult. This feeds into the ending, which was both a cliffhanger and difficult enough to decipher that there are already multiple online articles and videos here on YouTube devoted to explaining the ending or attempting to. This was a real shame for me, as the rest of the plot was great. The ghosts that are seen by Kevin and Ilonka throughout the series aren't really explained, and I really felt like this Julia Jane story was shoehorned into the series to give it loose ends for a potential sequel. So my explanation of the ending would be that it is purely a ploy to keep it open for more series of this. It's really important to note, obviously at this point, that the series does not end where the book ends, and it would be really, really hard for the series to do that and leave anything open. So I found Julia Jane's backstory to be fine. I didn't mind this sort of sideline of a character who was a former patient in the hospice and ended up supposedly cured and left the hospice. So that for me was fine, I didn't mind that at all, but her present day story I found exceptionally irritating, and every time this came up it annoyed me, and I feel like this has been left unfinished on purpose to create a big plot point for a further series. So overall I was happy with this series, ending aside. I was delighted with the elements of the book that were kept, including Anya's story in episode 2, The Two Danas, which is the only story told at midnight in the book that was kept into the series, and I thought it was adapted really well. I thought this series overall is a good tribute to Pike's work, despite some of his books being condensed into shorter stories. Also, for Pike fans, there are probably more Easter eggs than this, but one little Easter egg that I really enjoyed was that the group find a journal in episode 4, and it mentioned 3 more Christopher Pike books in that journal. So largely I enjoyed the adaptation, and it built on a lot of what the book did successfully. I would have liked more of a conclusion. I do see why the ending of the book would be difficult to bring to life on TV in terms of how sad an ending it would be and how depressing an ending to a series it would be. If this does get another series, which possibly it will, I think it definitely pulled off what it was doing well enough that it could be given another chance. If this gets another series, I really hope it retains the best elements of this series. I would love it to adapt more of Pike's stories, especially his best ones, which didn't get a showing here and that I absolutely love and am so fond of. I really, really hope it does not stray too far from the source down the path it seemed to lay out in the final moments. Really, really, really hope that they don't throw out the rest of the plot and go with what they've sort of shoehorned in. So please do chat to me about Christopher Pike in the comments. Did you have a favourite of his books? I personally loved The Visitor, Whisper of Death and Fall into Darkness. Those are three of my top favourites. If you've not read Pike, did you have a favourite episode if you've watched the series? Do you think you are going to watch the series? If so, let me know. I would really love to hear from both fans of Christopher Pike and new to Christopher Pike watchers of the series. I do have a fellow Pike loving friend who I introduced to Christopher Pike in high school, and she liked Christopher Pike even more than me and collected pretty much all of his books, I think. Really looking forward to talking to her about it when she's finished watching. As far as non-Christopher Pike readers go, my husband did watch this series with me and he enjoyed parts of it, but he found the ending confusing as well. It's definitely made me want to reread or read for the first time all of the other adapted books. So I will let you know if I do that in future. I hope you enjoyed this brief look at the series The Midnight Club and its source material, The Midnight Club by Christopher Pike. I've tried not to include spoilers, so it is a bit of a whistle-stop tour through both book and series. I would recommend this book, but it does come with heavy trigger warnings of obviously death, terminal illness, and all of the things that would accompany that. And as I say, it's not personally one of my favourite Pike novels, so I would suggest starting elsewhere with Christopher Pike. Of the ones that were adapted, I would say that the best one to start with would probably be The Wicked Heart or possibly The Eternal Enemy, both of which I really, really enjoy. If you have enjoyed this video today, please do give it a like, please do consider subscribing if you haven't already, and I would love for you to join me again soon for another video all about books here on Alice and the Giant Bookshelf. Bye for now.